Welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study, where we're looking at the book of Jude, really the letter from Jude, the brother of Jesus. I call it the postcard from Jude. This is the fourth installment. And last time, Jude began his reasoning why his readers, that would be the people at the time, and that would include us, should oppose false teachers. It's not just a warning of the future, it was about the present for him. The present. There was some things going on. Look at verse 4 again. For certain men whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. Okay, we began looking at the reasons to oppose false leaders, these men who have secretly slipped in among you. I plan to look at 5 reasons, and here they are. We already began with the first one. Reasons why they and we should oppose these false teachers: because their future is doomed, is what we covered already. And then you can see there's other ones here too. Their ways are to reject authority, their religion is full of error, their leadership is false, their ways are godless. So since we looked at the first reason, we don't need to cover that anymore. Their future is doomed. It was more of an implied reason. Jude brought up 3 incidents in the past history on earth and in heaven where attempts to defy God did not end well. So that was the past ones that we talked about. Unbelieving Israelites, fallen angels, and the wicked people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So now we're going to look at 4 other reasons from Jude's writing. Jude is no longer implying anything. He's telling them what they can observe now, if they look for it. In the next 3 verses, 8 through to 10, he speaks of the false teachers of his day. Jude concentrates on their rejecting authority first. Their ways are to reject authority. That's why they should be opposed. In the very same way, he says in verse 8, these dreamers pollute their own bodies, reject authority, and slander celestial beings. But even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not dare to bring a slanderous accusation against him, but said, the Lord rebuke you. Notice he calls them dreamers. What do you suppose he meant? I think it's either that they claim to receive revelations or prophecies, and there's false revelations and prophecies, of course, that they got through dreams, or maybe he's referring to the fact their ideas weren't shaped by divine truth. Instead, they were shaped by their own dreams and imaginings, faulty opinions. In other words, they were out of touch with truth and reality. Now, if you're like me, in verse 9, but even the archangel Michael wouldn't be familiar to you. It wasn't to me. Mercy, be quiet. You won't find the story of Michael the devil and Moses' body in the Bible. Turns out it's a story from an apocryphal book called The Assumption of Moses. The Assumption of Moses. But this book didn't make it as an inspired book of the Old Testament. Is it true? Don't know for certain. Is Jude claiming it to be true? He's not even saying that. But apparently it was a story well known to the readers of Jude. And Jude used it as an example to make a point. Even the high archangel Michael didn't dare diss another angel, even Satan. There he is saying he didn't diss Lucifer when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses. So, yet these false teachers had the arrogance to diss angels. He's saying in verse 8, these dreamers pollute their own bodies, reject authority, and slander celestial beings or angels. Okay, respecting angels isn't the important point. It's respecting authority, I believe. The authority of God. They're rejecting the authority of God, the authority of Scripture, the authority of the leaders. They became their own authority. So, what more does Jude have to say about these men? In verse 10, yet these men speak abusively against whatever they do not understand, and what things they do understand by instinct, like unreasoning animals, these are the very things that destroy them. Again, rejecting authority. If something couldn't be comprehended or explained, they rejected it or they mocked it. He uses that analogy. They were like unreasoning animals. Peter, talking about the same thing, called them brute beasts. I'm going to put that up too. This is 2 Peter. You'll find there's some similarities between 2 Peter and Jude, like perhaps they've influenced each other. So in verse 12 of 2 Peter chapter 2, but these men blaspheme in matters they do not understand. They are like brute beasts, creatures of instinct, born only to be caught and destroyed, and like beasts, they too will perish. So that's pretty scathing. What is Peter really saying here? They're like irrational animals, right? Who are born merely to be slaughtered. This irrationality is defying authority. Okay, let's continue with one other reason they should be opposed. Another one. And that is they should be opposed because their religion is full of error. And here Jude says, woe to them. They have taken the way of Cain. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. So here we have another three things, another triplet. And these take some looking into. At least they did for me. The first one, the way of Cain. Taking the way of Cain. That we know that story, right? The first one compares the false teachers to Cain. But now that Genesis story where Cain kills his brother Abel, that's the big thing that happens. Jude is probably not talking about that, about the false, about murderers. He's not saying false teachers are murderers like Cain was toward his brother Abel. But it could be a comparison of selfishness and greed. Or it could mean, like Cain, they disobediently devised their own ways of worship. That's what I'm getting toward. Seems to make most sense. Recall that God wanted a meat sacrifice, and Cain took it upon himself to offer up the fruits of the soil. I'm going to bring up Genesis chapter 4, halfway through verse 2. Now Abel, that's Cain's younger brother, kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. So far, so good. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. The way of Cain, how does that fit in then? Could be that Jude is saying the false teachers were endorsing a religion of human works. This was Cain's thinking, is that, okay, I'm not going to listen to what God has to say, but I feel that my offering is good enough, and I'm just going to give him some, when God specifically wanted an animal offering, kind of a prelude to Jesus Christ, who became the ultimate sacrifice. So that's why I think the point is not about the murder of Cain toward Abel, but the way Cain disrespected God in his worship. So think about that some more. There could be other things you can come up with on that too. The next indictment Jude has for the false teachers is that they have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. Well, you may have heard of Balaam, mostly because the donkey talked to him. That's the only thing I really remembered about him. But look how it says they have rushed. Let's look at that again. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. So now we have an error here. Balaam's error. So Balaam was the owner who beat the donkey 3 times and then it talked to him. But you'll find in the story in Numbers 22, the gist of the story is that God was angry with Balaam for going off with a prince to put a curse on some people and make a lot of money. So there's a greed factor in here. God was angry with his greedy motives. Notice he says he loved the wages of wickedness. Where do we see that? Yeah, who loved the wages of wickedness. It's not important for Jude's point, but the donkey saved him. Okay, so what's the error? I think it was that just like Balaam pretended to serve God but was motivated by greed, the false teachers were doing the same. Then we have a third error he brings up, Korah's rebellion, another thing I'd never heard of. This story comes from Numbers chapter 16. Korah and some other leaders led a revolt against Moses and Aaron. Now, I did remember that revolt, but I didn't know Korah wasn't heading that up. Too much to cover the whole story, but here's the problem in verse 3 of Numbers 16. I think I already put it on. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" Okay, so that is God rebuking them, Korah being the leader, for not acknowledging God's delegated authority, which was Moses and Aaron. So their rebellion was actually against God himself. In his pride, Korah thought he could cut out the middleman. He could approach God directly and not through God's chosen mediators, Moses and Aaron. In the same way, these false teachers were defying the authority of Christ and the apostles. They were skipping all that, thinking for Korah, just like Korah and his group, the consequences being skipping Christ, skipping the apostles, is not God's plan. And God swallowed Korah and his group up. He destroyed them, and he would destroy the false teachers. And so Jude was so certain of the eventual destruction of the false teachers, he put it in the past tense that they've been destroyed. They have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. Kind of like jumping to the future and the past. So there you go. Okay, so Jude finishes talking about this, some errors in their religion. Why else should they be opposed? They should be opposed because their leadership is false. He writes in verse 12, Jude writes, "These men are blemishes at your love feast, eating with you without the slightest qualm, shepherds who feed only themselves. They are clouds without rain, blown along by the wind, autumn trees without fruit and uprooted, twice dead. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame, wandering stars, for whom blackest darkness has been reserved forever." Jude, in very poetic terms, points out that these false teachers had made their way into the churches. Notice they had infiltrated the love feasts, celebrations of believers, including the Last Supper, the Lord's Supper. And they were shepherds, meaning leaders. He then describes their bad leadership through a lot of metaphors. So as their shepherding role, they were not fulfilling their major responsibility, which was to feed the sheep. Instead, they fed only themselves. They had no water for thirsty souls. They were not bearing fruit. They were all foam and no substance. And then we get to the last one. They were wandering stars. We call them shooting stars. I read somewhere that this is a really neat comparison, metaphor, because fixed stars are great for navigation. They help guide navigators. Shooting stars, these wandering stars, are useless. So in the same way, an unwary follower of through the church, but a follower of Jesus, but going under the leadership of these false teachers, might mistake one of these leaders as a fixed star, one that they could count on, and instead could be led astray, as a wandering star would do. The false teacher can lead so many astray, so they're deserving of the blackest darkness. Okay, there's one last reason to oppose the false leaders. They should be opposed because their ways are godless. Now, in verse 14, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, meaning the seventh generation from Adam, prophesied about these men. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict all the ungodly of all the ungodly acts they have done in the ungodly way, and of all the harsh words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. You see a word coming out a lot here? Ungodly, ungodly, ungodly. Several times there. Jude definitely wants to reinforce his description of their nature. They are ungodly. He quotes Enoch, but there's no agreement on where that quote came from. It's definitely not in the Old Testament, in the books that we have. There is a similar passage in the apocryphal book of Enoch. It's called the Book of Enoch, but it's not exactly. If it was from that book, Jude was endorsing the prophecy, not the book. Or maybe it was a popular oral tradition. Some have suggested he was given the quote directly from God. Regardless, this is something that the readers back then of Jude might have had much more knowledge about it than we do. The fact of Enoch. But the point is the same. Whether Enoch, whether we know how they got the quote, the ungodly. These false teachers put on an ungodly show. They're doing ungodly acts. They're putting on a show. And he continues there in verse 16. These men are grumblers and fault finders. They follow their own evil desires. They boast about themselves and flatter others for their own advantage. So they're discontented, self-centered, egotistical, and deceptively flattering. That would be false teachers then, false teachers today, false teachers in the future. So there we're getting in today's verses. We really got a big identification and description of these false teachers. And he gives many good reasons why they and we should oppose them. So let me bring that listing back up again. Reasons why we should oppose false teachers. There they are. I think Jude is getting his readers fired up. He's giving them reasons to oppose the false teachers. But we're going to continue this letter, or this postcard, next week, where he will give advice on what action to take, what action they should take, what action we should take. So until then, may the Lord be with you, and take care.